are two sentences from the same teacher in the same course. Garvey wrote that Christ, quote, had in his veins the blood of all mankind and belonged to no particular race, end quote. And Garvey wrote, quote, never admit that Jesus Christ was a white man. Jesus had mostly Negro blood in him, end quote. A raceless Christ and a black Christ, taught by one man in 1 year. This is part 2 of Marcus Garvey's message to the people, and it is where the doctrine gets built. In part 1, he taught 11 students in a Toronto classroom to think for themselves, inside a chain of command designed to make them obey. Now watch what he tells those minds to believe. He hands them a God, a Christ, a method, and an enemy, each one recut to fit the race, and he is explicit about why. Every channel that shapes a mind, he says, is a weapon. The press, the pulpit, the cinema, the schoolroom, Garvey writes, quote, are all propaganda agencies, end quote, and they have always been aimed at you. So pick them up, he says, and aim them back. When a man hands you what to believe and tells you it is a weapon for your side, is taking it up freedom or only a change of owner? Start with God, because Garvey starts further out than you expect. His God is not a man in the sky. Garvey writes, quote, he is not a person nor a physical being. He is spirit and he is universal intelligence, end quote. The God of this course is intelligence itself, which means the thesis of part 1, that intelligence rules the world, was never only about power. It was theology. To read 4 hours a day was to pray, and the library was the altar. A God who is intelligence does not hold all his children the same. The ignorant are not behind. They are far from God. And a God with no body and no race should have an image with no race either. But go back to the 2 sentences we opened with. Raceless in lesson 6, mostly Negro in lesson 1. The God stays universal. The image becomes a possession. Call it a contradiction, or call it what happens when you inherit a religion that was used as a weapon against you and try to beat it back into a tool. The cross itself, Garvey says, belongs to the Negro, because a black man, Simon of Cyrene, carried it up the hill. And this was not theory. In August of 1924, his movement proclaimed a Black Madonna and a black man of sorrows, the image his people needed, with no permission asked of anyone. But an image you commission because your people need it carries a cost. When your child asks whether it is true, and the only honest answer is that it is true for us, you have not handed them a faith, you have handed them a uniform. Freedom or new ownership? In lesson 16, Garvey stops implying it and says it flat. The white Madonna, the angels in the schoolbook, the Bible itself. Garvey writes, quote, the pictures of the Madonna and Christ and of the angels are painted portraying a white race, so as to inflict upon the rest of the world the belief that God, the angels, and the Holy Family are all white, end quote. His instruction is not to argue with it. It is to tear it down. Quote, tear from your walls all pictures that glorify other races, end quote. And then a line that sounds cruel until you sit with the evidence. Quote, never allow your children to play with or to have white dolls, end quote. He wrote that in 1937. A few years later, 2 psychologists, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, set a brown doll and a white doll in front of black children and asked which one was good, which one was nice, which one looked like them. Enough of those children reached for the white doll that the Supreme Court cited the Clark's work in its 1954 decision on segregation. Nearly a century later, the picture is painted by a different machine. And when researchers audited the leading image generators in 2025, They still found dark skin in barely 1 image out of 10. The diagnosis was real, in his century and in ours. The cure is where it turns. In part 1, he taught you to question everything the white man writes. Now, in the very lesson that hands you a test for their propaganda, quote, is it honest? Is it true? End quote. He tells you to broadcast your own claims, whether or not they are, because, he writes, quote, an error not corrected ultimately becomes a fact, end quote. Audit theirs. Manufacture yours. That is the master key. And it erases the one thing part 1 was built to protect: the line between what is true and what is merely useful. A doctrine needs an enemy. And in Lesson 17, Garvey names one that surprises people. Not the boss, the communist. Quote, communism is a white man's creation, end quote, founded on the theory of a man, Karl Marx, who, quote, knew very little about Negroes, end quote. The real danger to the black man, he argues, is not the white capitalist, who will at least hire you for profit. It is the poor white man. Garvey writes, quote, the man who caught your forefathers in Africa was not the white capitalist, but the white sailor, end quote. The same low class, he says, from whom the communists are drawn. So stay out of it. Quote, let the communists fight their own battles and stand back to watch the fight, end quote. Asked to join, tell them, quote, when you get to Russia, but not before then, end quote. This is not simple anti-leftism. Garvey had praised Lenin, but his fight was with the American communists trying to hollow out his organization from inside. It is something more total than left or right. It is race, placed above every other line a person could draw. Not everyone in that room agreed. Black socialists like A. Philip Randolph were already arguing the other way, that race first abandons the black worker, that the poor white sailor is the capitalist tool and not the root of the thing. And they ran a campaign with a blunt name: Garvey must go. And then there is where this logic arrives. In June of 1922, Garvey sat down with the acting head of the Ku Klux Klan because both men wanted the races kept apart. The logic was consistent, and consistency has a cost. A politics that says, stand back and watch the fight, can lose the line between separation as self-defense and separation as surrender, and leave you unsure whether you fought for freedom or only for a new owner. Garvey did not live to hear the cleanest answer to his course. It came in 1949, 9 years after his death, from a man who shared his faith and his people, but not his method. Howard Thurman, one of the most important black theologians of the century, wrote a small book called Jesus and the Disinherited, a book that would become a touchstone for the civil rights movement that came after him. Thurman looked at the same Christ and found his power somewhere else entirely. Jesus matters, he said, not because of how he is branded or whose flag he flies, but because he was a poor man with his back to the wall of an empire who refused to let fear or hatred own him. The disinherited, Thurman argued, do not need a religion that is effective. They need one that is true. Because a faith you keep only because it is useful will leave you the moment honesty starts to cost you. That is the argument that answers the question Garvey's course leaves open. Not whose Christ is stronger, but whether a Christ you chose because you needed him is one you can still kneel to when no one is winning. Garvey never answers the question the weapon leaves behind. When you teach a people to wield the tools that were used on them, can a mind trained to see propaganda in everything, including its own side's images, still believe anything without first checking whether it is useful? He handed his students a God they could be smart enough to reach, a Christ they could repaint, a fact they could build by repetition, and an enemy they could pick by color. Against 3 centuries of being written about by other people, it is hard to say he was wrong to pick up the weapon. But before you judge the 11 in that room, turn the question on yourself, because you have a doctrine too. Which of the things you believe did you reason your way into, and which were handed to you, painted in your colors, already aimed? And if you can no longer tell the two apart, how sure are you of the side you are on?